In my life, thank God, I have never seen NYOH as such a phenomenon in the form of black men or red eyes, lol. But there were stories that sometimes give me goosebumps. The first one was just awesome. A couple of months ago, I got a part-time job in a restaurant in the city center. Calling customers at the door, you know, people like that piss everyone off. So on the very first day of my work, before the start of my shift, I was chatting with a guy of about 20 years old, who, apparently, was also getting ready for the start of his shift. The only thing I remember is his blonde hair, a mohawk, and lop ears. It's good that I didn't really get a good look at him because I was nervous before my first day at work. The guy was just sitting in the corner of the room, buried in what seemed to me to be his phone. While I was tying my apron with the logo of our tavern, he was telling me about how many people come into the restaurant in the summer and how much work. Who he worked as, a cook, a bartender or a waiter, I didn't understand, and I didn't give a shit in principle. At the end of the shift, I went to the same locker room to take off my apron and head home. There were 2 chicks in the locker room, later they turned out to be dishwashers. One of them lit a match to light a candle. I turned around and was shocked. Damn, I just opened my mouth and stood there for about 2 minutes in complete shock. Next to this candle was a photo, wrapped in black tarpaulin, of the same guy I had spoken to just 6 hours ago. Having come to my senses a little, I asked why the hell this photo was there. The answer made me immediately pile up a mountain of bricks. The ants said that this guy worked for them as a cook for a year, and they killed him 2 days ago when he was returning home. I didn't tell them anything, I just left with a stone face. I know that after death, phantoms wander around the places where they spent a lot of time during life, but to so clearly bullshit me about work. In general, I don't stay in the locker room for more than a minute and I don't see any creeps. 2 in the family, staying alone at home, I came up with a funny entertainment for myself. Namely, I turn on a channel on the TV at full volume in my mother's room, for example, about animals and cartoons in my room, turning off the sound completely and laughing at how Dasha the Traveler speaks in a man's voice about an elephant that escaped from the zoo. Soon my laughter was stopped by the fact that my voice began to gradually become blurry and the volume to decrease. Entering my mother's room, I discovered that the TV was completely turned off. 3 When I was 12 years old, I'm 19 now, my mother brought home from work 2 small soft toys in the form of fish. One black, the other white, yin yang for God's sake. Well, I put them on the closet and forgot about them. And then I realized that looking at our photo against the background of that very closet, I began to feel that something was really wrong here. And it's true. In the photo there was a white fish on the right, and a black one on the left. Looking at the closet, everything was the other way around. The black one stood on the left all these years, and it still stands. But in the photo of the idiot, you can see the opposite. I calmed down for a second, thinking that it was just a mirror effect, but everything else was in its place. And we remained in the photo as we took the photo. Asking my friend if she had swapped these fish, she called me crazy. That's how it is, Anons, that's how it is. Anons, I can give you a full account of all the paranormal phenomena I witnessed at different stages of my childhood, and even if you convince me 3 times that it didn't happen, it did. It wasn't some kind of altered state or suspiciousness. Since childhood, I've been noted to have abnormal low emotion and unhealthy memory, so excuses like I made it up / I was impressed don't work. In total, I'll highlight 4 truly unusual cases: burning rag, telepaths, green sky and stuff behind the fence. Burning rag. It's simple. Place of action, Murmansk. I'm 11.5 Earth years old. Interior, my room. Exterior, view from my window. Time of action, deep night. Time of year, early autumn. Anyway, that night, as usual, I didn't sleep and shot out the window at any late passers-by, and there are always such. I was in an extremely cheerful state. I had slept well the previous night, not a wink of sleep in my eye, in my headphones, some English queers, which I was crazy about at the time. Tired of looking out the window, I lay down at the table to read. The view from my window is of the roof of the neighboring 9-story building, standing a little lower, so when I sat down on the floor, it turned out that I could see a patch of sky above this very roof out of the corner of my eye. So, at first I caught the burning rag out of the corner of my eye. That's how I immediately classified it, burning rag. It looked similar. Then the contacts in my head clicked. Okay, someone, let's say, set fire to some paper and threw it out the window. But how did it take so long to fall? And why the hell is it falling so slowly? I get up from the floor and look out the window. And I watch this phenomenon for quite a long time. In general, the essence of the phenomenon is that from above, from behind my house, at a sort of helicopter altitude, something was moving that resembled, in fact, a burning rag. Not very big. I don't know where this effect came from, but it looked like it was burning. Like a regular flame. But it was moving at a stable altitude, i.e., as if floating forward, very slowly, and in a sort of vertical line. A couple of times this thing stopped, which, if it were a really burning rag, would have been, of course, impossible. I watched this nonsense up to the roof of the house, behind which it subsequently disappeared. By the way, one could judge the size relative to the roof. This crap really was small. Hardly more than a meter, 70 centimeters, MB. There, above the roof, it hung for a while, then continued moving in a straight line, but now with a greater degree of bevel. Therefore, soon this thing was no longer visible from over the edge of the roof. I doubt that any air currents are capable of organizing such movement. And the weather was windless, that's what alarmed me. But it looked at least as if it was naturally burning. That is, a lump of fire in the air. A fireball, if you will. It could have been some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, BTW, but I couldn't find anything similar anywhere. The color that fire usually is. Red. Well, insofar as it's red. I say, imagine that a rag was set on fire and it moves somehow strangely through the air. That's what it looked like. Crap behind the fence asterisk. So, about the fence. It's more interesting there. The scene, Odessa. I'm 14 years old. I'm walking along the fence. It's a clear day. Birds are chirping. A wonderful sound suddenly intervenes in the chirping of the birds. A sort of YYKH with a sob. I, being a socially responsible element, stop and look towards the supposed source of the sound, behind the fence. The fence is taller than me, but the boards are quite far apart from each other, so looking into the yard is no problem. But now the troubles begin, because further on I was literally standing and scratching my head, looking at what was there. Optionally, it was a pretty muscular guy in a tank top and jeans. And non-optionally, something bent him quite a bit. You know, the first monster from the movie Silent Hill? Not exactly that, but something similar. Or rather, how I photographed it in my brain. Here is a guy, he somehow leaned back and stretched his arms forward. As if he was about to somersault over his back. And where the head is, something begins that I still can't classify. Either it was something that held him and kind of bent him back, or his head naturally fell to the ground like that. No, because A, the lock is in the gate, B, this shit quickly recoiled behind the toilet. Well, such a toilet in private houses. Stonework. I watched it, well, for about 15 seconds, but the thing is, I didn't expect to see anything like that, so much that the kid freaked out. This is about help. So, even though it disappeared pretty quickly, I heard those YYKHs for a while. But the level of fucking awesome was high. I literally stood there and blinked my eyes. Then it suddenly became brickla cold for me, and I quickly got out of there. Regarding the street. Private sector. The house number, no, absolutely no way, but I seem to remember the street itself. Some Dneprodzержinskaya comes to mind, but it seems to me that it was different. Somehow. On D. I don't really have anywhere to go there, my uncle and my mother fell out completely, and so it seems like no one is waiting for me in Odessa. Green sky. The year is 2008. The hour? Well, I usually hang out early, before the sun shines. Around 12, I suppose. With the green sky, everything is quite simple. It was most likely a simple aurora borealis, or some kind of magnetic anomaly. Murmansk is beyond the Arctic Circle, so northern lights are a common occurrence. The exterior is simple. 2011, I'm walking home, I'm walking late, there is a sudden flash of green overhead. That's all. I raise my head, cloudy, no precipitation. Telepaths. Again, there is some explanation for telepaths, the story is more funny than anything else. It happened in that glorious period when, in order to get to the Lyceum, I hope the Sheriga will rot in hell, and the devils will poke their dicks at the staff, I had to take a trolleybus across the entire city. In the trolleybus I observed two strange guys. They were standing on the far platform. It was winter, the windows were fogged up, such steam came out on them, do you understand what I mean? You can still run your fingers over it and draw pretzels. Oh well. One was dressed in some kind of practical beach jacket with pockets, the other, in something equally ordinary. The point is this, one of them turned around and drew an exclamation mark with his finger on this window sweat. I was staring out of that window, I was sitting facing it, i.e. with my back to the direction of the trolleybus, and that's why I saw it all. Then they turned to each other. And, in fact, as I got the impression, they were communicating with each other. Without words, just with facial expressions. It was really strange and somehow funny to watch. One makes big eyes, the other half smiles. One nods slightly, the other starts scratching his lower lip with his teeth. One closes one eye, the other closes the other eye. That's why I called them telepaths. As if they were communicating with a switched-off talker. It wasn't sign language, because they weren't waving their hands. Well, they didn't look stoned. Usually you can tell right away when someone's stoned. But they chatted and calmly continued riding. They got out together. Some kind of strange mental disorder, one for two, or what? Like Kuntz in Russia's? Maybe, although what is there to scout in my shithole? Although, if you think about it, a port city, there is a military base and closed settlements of all sorts. But still, they did not look like scouts, they looked somehow half funny half fuck understandable. But not stoned, and, to be honest, not some kind of psychos, hence this contrasted so much. It is possible, but they had a cool idiocy back then. And such respectable men. In short, a small conclusion on my stories, the most unpleasant, you understand, the fence. I still can't think of anything for this, even a burning rag, in the end, can just be a burning rag, and telepathic men can just be extravagant merrymakers, and I can't vouch for what I saw either, you understand, the fucking factor. By the way, I don't like the private sectors of the CIS. They are almost always some kind of fucking neglected, dirty, unsuitable for life and in general. In Odessa, every second one is like that. However, I do not argue, maybe I came across such bad private owners. By the way, here's another funny story from my childhood. Nothing paranormal, just funny. I knew a guy who called himself nothing less than a gnome hunter. He was a completely crazy guy who hung around our hills and made a living from picking berries. He was some kind of half-Finn, and he knew how to throw wicker baskets really well, in which he actually collected berries and mushrooms. He actually worked at a motor depot. Now it's closed. I don't know what happened to him or how. So here's the gist. At one time I myself liked to hang around the woods, and I ran into this wild guy more than once. In general, he was quite peace-loving, always offering me whitefish and all that. And one way or another, he always ended up with these gnomes. Gnomes, in his opinion, are some kind of harmful forest fauna that needs to be exterminated so that they, well, like, don't get bold and don't climb into houses. When I asked him to show me at least one gnome, he took out a notebook and showed me his sketches. They looked like anything but gnomes, well, in our minds. Some kind of small demons, half insects, half rats, half who knows what. And he also showed gnome tunnels, lol. We really do have such things in the hills, like holes going deep, with concrete slabs above some of them. I predict that they tried to lay some kind of communications through the hill, well, wires or something like that, and abandoned them. Well, he claimed that these gnomes live in these holes. A possessed half-fin. A big knitted scarf, a dirty green jacket, jeans, a backpack/basket, a yarmulke-style hat. He had dark circles under his eyes. Like a heavy drinker. His hair was a total mess. He was about 22 to 23 years old. I was 17 to 18 then, when I was heading off to the woods. I would gladly cross paths with him again. He was a really warm-hearted guy, not malicious. He would explain how to tell blueberries from crowberries, bitter mushrooms from hares, and all that. And he would always be like, "Would you like some cigarettes?" I would be like, "No, thanks, I don't smoke." And he would say, "That's right. I will," and laugh. What's the point? He was clearly either too drunk to make up these gnomes, or he was eating mushrooms, lol. Once, after a walk, I was walking home to my granny. It was late, dark outside. I went into the entrance, went up the stairs, needed the third floor. As usual, there was no light on the second floor. Between the first and second, there was a school-age girl, with a backpack, I think, I don't remember exactly. There, between the first and second, someone is always waiting for someone, a common thing. I went up to the darkness of the second floor. Wait, was that a school-age girl standing in the entrance at night and waiting for someone? I, full of curiosity and slight excitement for the young lady, turned around to seriously ask the question and realized that there was no girl there. I didn't build a shit brick factory, I just pressed my back against the wall, and with my peripheral vision analyzed everything on the site. When I panic in the dark, the trauma of my youth from watching a movie in which Elizabeth Bathory slaughtered young Martins appearing in the dark comes to mind. It always seems to me that she is from behind, I even pee half turned. Well, that's all. Can I also tell you about my beloved grandma's house? The place where I lived since birth, where I spent my youth. I always loved to come there, especially with a laptop. You sit there, play for days and your parents don't nag you. In general, thanks to grandma, it was very cozy there. But as is common with residents of such apartments, they sin with trips to the garden, they live there all summer, and you, meanwhile, download another 80s at night, drive whoever you don't want, and sometimes abuse it. But sometimes, a strange feeling attacks there, a feeling of indescribable fear. You suddenly bulge your balls, hide your legs and sit like a fool. That's why I often called a friend from the first floor. We watched movies, often horror films, but everything was within the norm on the poltergeist scale. You know who has been to panel 5-story buildings? The layout of a 3-room apartment implies long corridors and small rooms. I lived in the farthest one. I will keep silent about my cat, who often howled, bulging his balls, into this dark corridor. Of course, I am alone at home, cursing the cat and ready to pee out the window, just to avoid trudging to the toilet along this very corridor. But one night was special. I am lying in bed, 3 o'clock, cannot sleep. The cat, as always, is at the intersection of 3 paths, the hall, the corridor, the room, sleeping. The grinding of the keyhole, long, obvious attempts to get even with the lock. I am paralyzed in bed, shocked. Home and waiter. I wait, the grinding continues, I go over it in my head, my grandfather's axe under the door, a steel shoehorn, maybe he will run to the door and cause a commotion in order to scare him off. You are an owl, lie down and accept death. It became quiet. Do you know how cats react to the grinding of a keyhole? The cat knew for sure, it wasn't Granny, he was gone without a trace. Morning came, I met Mom in the afternoon, I tell her everything as it is, and in response, what is this? Mom tells me a story. When they lived with the whole family in this apartment, Granny usually went to the garden, leaving the little children alone at home, brother and sister. There was no steel door then, only a wooden one. One night, it was the same and 2 frightened children, propping the door with a heavy washing machine, did not sleep under the door until the morning. This happened more than once. This happened to me 30 years later. And always, when the children are home alone. No one died here, Grandma and I got a new apartment. And now for more than 30 years, someone wants to open this door, someone wants to return home. I can tell you a few more hospital stories. 15 female suicides on a chest of sleeping pills. Yo ho ho. And a stack of razor blades. Hey, I've been in the public wards. Sad face, actually, I agree, it's plebeian. But it's fun. I still remember the guy who shit himself every time he fainted. He had a rare form of epilepsy. And he fainted often. Actually, it was more fun with this adult asshole who loved the singer Maxim. And he would turn her up on his phone at full volume. If someone tried to belittle his taste in music, he would become rude and aggressive. And he was also a Christian. In our ward there was a cheerful fat blackie with an inverted cross on his neck, and one night he suggested calling Satan or some bullshit like the Queen of Spades. This guy got really scared and started saying that this is a goddess, someone of you will be carried out feet first. Blackie cheered up, I actively supported the idea, and more fearless little bastards who are not afraid of Satan himself. In short, the Blackbeard started laying out cards and whispering something in Elvish satanic. Fan Maxim started to freak out wildly and promised to rat on the nurses. And there on the bed there was still a little bastard sleeping, and right in the middle of the ritual he started to jerk his hands and moan for no reason. Fan Maxim went to rat on the nurses, but since it was night, he got his ass kicked for not sleeping. Then the Blackbeard took a picture of him and said, "Look, there's a black aura above you." In general, this Fan Maxim was a terrible asshole. And there was also a small, completely insane guy, named Herman, who tormented all the big guys in the ward to the point that they started to beat him up. And I also remember an eternally sad boy of about 6 years old. He had a pretty good mobile phone for those years. One time he was watching something on her, I asked him what he was watching. And he answered in such a sad voice for some reason, porn. There was a universal sadness in his voice. I also remember a girl who explained to me in a confidential whisper how to get the bathroom keys out of the nurses if you want to fuck. Which nurse gives them, what are the symbols, and all that stuff. The nurse gives the keys, if anything, LOL. It's like the patients give them. Children's hospital is fun. Especially if you're 15 to 17. At 18, they're already pushing you into adulthood. I cover several points with these stories. I've been in hospital 4 times. And I was in intensive care, 4 beds, a room without doors and a table in the middle. Yes, a nurse sits there and keeps watch. so, one of them was a former Afghan, with 2 higher educations, apparently military, about 50 to 55 years old. And he was admitted with alcohol poisoning. He told mainly stories about his life, but one of his stories really stuck in my memory. In general, in the Afghan war at night, precisely at night, one person in their unit disappeared. Completely disappeared. There was no noise, nothing. Even the night watch did not notice anything. Disappeared where he was lying. The next morning there was a completely empty bed. He was discharged during the day, I was brought in at night, and 10 hours later he was discharged. He, being drunk, pulled out the catheter, shit diarrhea all over the bed and was so insane that they tied him up with ligatures. But he is a relatively kind person. Then there was an old man of about 70 to 75 years old. Also with alcohol intoxication. He was delivered in a completely senseless, let me explain, in a stupor, unconscious, state. They also inserted a catheter into him, though he did not pull it out. He lay on ligatures for a couple of days. And then they found pneumonia in him, and in an advanced stage. They had to do a bronchoscopy, a tube in the bronchi, they dripped antibiotics, but they saved the old man. He told me that a week ago he was chopping wood near the house. He chopped for a long time, got exhausted and then expired. And at night he had a dream like this, some black shadow, or silhouette, I have already tried to cleanse and organize his stream of thoughts, stands over him and his bed, then raises his hands, throws off the blanket and literally plunges them into the lung area. After about 5 days, he gets completely drunk, down to the squirrel. Then he was taken to the ward. A day later he was diagnosed with pneumonia in full swing, I think it was red liver disease, or white, I don't remember anymore. That is, if he hadn't gotten drunk, he would have died in a day or two. By the way, I also remember how on the second day they brought in a guy of about 17 in an affective state. He was talking incoherent nonsense, and not alcoholic. He started to come to his senses only the next day. The cops came to him and asked what he had been smoking. Was it spice by any chance? It's not known what he was smoking there, but it's stupid to shoot up in front of the cops, so he was talking nonsense about how he smoked a cigarette at the station and then passed out. What cigarette? A regular one. Anyway, when he let go he told me that he was standing calmly at the station and smoking a regular cigarette, Kent's, I think, when suddenly he felt sick, everything in his head changed abruptly, and then he fell into this peculiar seizure. Who knows if it was catatonia or not, but no substances, no cannabinoids, no amphetamine/ketamine/racemates, no opioids, were found in his blood. That's when he was taken to the psychiatric hospital. An ambulance arrived, took him by the arms and took him away. Then, about 4 days later, I was transferred to a general ward. There was a guy who took a sip from a bottle that contained, sick, poison for the Colorado potato beetle. And he didn't have time to swallow it. He scooped it into his mouth, realized what he had scooped up, and immediately spat it out. He was immediately brought in, given an 4, and discharged. That guy was also lucky. Then there was the loser, as I nicknamed him to myself. In short, they also brought in a guy of about 55 to 60 years old with alcohol intoxication. He was lying on ties during the 4 drips so that he wouldn't tear off the catheter. And they poured a couple of cups of diazepam, or phenazepam, into his bag with the fluid so that he wouldn't twitch. And he fell asleep. So that man managed to shit himself while he was sleeping. And a liquid, smelly one, so much so that it was leaking out from under him. Alcoholic diarrhea, as the nurse who cleaned up after him and took him to the sink said. In short, they transferred this lowlife to the intensive care unit. And there was another old man, 60 to 65 years old, whose appearance evoked subconscious disgust towards himself. Old, flabby, with psoriasis in the prime of its exacerbation. He wheezed when talking, and he smelled of piss because he had pissed on his pants leg when he pissed into a duck, a special measuring jar with a curved neck. I never found out what he got there with. But most likely with alcohol too. I'll repost my story from the old days. It was more than 10 years ago. First, we moved to another city, to a private house, and a year later we were going to move again to another place. And at that time, my mother, half jokingly and half seriously, talked to the brownie. I read that before moving, you need to invite him to the new house with you. The first time, I guess, we successfully moved the brownie. The second time we packed up the things, some of them were already taken away, the house was half empty, my mother hadn't called the brownie yet. And so, it's daytime, only my mother is in the house, the rest of the family is already in the new house, the furniture and everything else has been taken away, the rest of the things that need to be collected are lying in bales in the living room. My mother is lying in the living room and watching TV or doing something else. Then, in her words, I hear footsteps on the second floor. The house is 2-story, I forgot to say, a distinct patter of feet. The steps are not very heavy, more like the tread of a child or a teenager. The steps go down the wooden stairs to the living room, then you can hear rustling, as if someone is rummaging through bundles of things. Then everything stopped, the sounds died down. Mom says that she was so scared that she couldn't move for a long time. But in vain, the living room is next to the hall, if she had looked out of the hall, she might have seen something interesting. We decided that the brownie was afraid that we would leave without him, and without a reminder he rummaged through things. I'll write something cool. Whether to believe it or not, decide for yourself. Maybe I should write to the store, but it's rotten there. I heard a story from my mother about her sister, i.e. my aunt. My dad later confirmed it too. My aunt was a schoolgirl at the time. Well, and like all children, she was running around the yard with the kids. One day there was a funeral for some old lady from the neighboring building. Well, the kids were told not to get underfoot and generally not to go near the entrance while the procession was going on, or whatever they used to do at funerals in the Soviet Union. In general, the kids naturally didn't listen and hung around near the entrance while the body was being carried out, the funeral service was being held, etc. After some time, the girls brought the aunt into the apartment. She was in total fucking happening. The temperature rose, foam came out of her mouth, she was shaking all over, and the worst thing was she saying all the words backwards. Any word. They called an ambulance. The woman was getting worse. The ambulance arrived. The driver refused to pick her up because he says, "She's fucked. I won't take her to the hospital." Well, they'll be held accountable later if a schoolgirl dies in an ambulance, something like that. In general, everyone is in shock. Dad went to some old lady he knew, who luckily was home. She was whispering something, prayers, or something. In general, she spent a long time with her. She then said that the evil eye was very strong. The aunt got better, then they took her to the hospital, gave her an 4, and she remained alive and well. Sorry for the chaotic story, it just stuck out to me that she said the words backwards. Maybe someone heard something like that. Dad says it all looked creepy. And yes, they checked her, it wasn't epilepsy. Nothing like that happened to her again. I think she was in a mental hospital, but that was when she was already studying at the university. That's a different story. Everything else seems to be the same. Family stories on SN are of no interest to anyone. The only thing I heard about was a book that my grandma left me. But that story is chaotic, you can believe it or not. It has something to do with magic. A book with folk recipes. Maybe not even a book, but a notebook with notes. Like prayers. I've never seen it, and when I asked to look at it, they told me to go to hell. The lady explained that for all these things you need to have life experience. Like live, fuck chicks, start a family, don't bother with bullshit. Her father-in-law used that book, he lived with them. He was a military man all his life, so it somehow didn't fit together that a retired military officer reads prayers there and draws crosses in the corners of the house. Oh yeah, about the crosses, that's how he got rid of mice from the house using the recipe in that book. He was whispering something, drawing around the house, and then the rats and mice left. No, they didn't disappear, they just left, gathered in a bunch and went out the front door in groups. I was shocked. It certainly doesn't sound plausible, but I'm writing it like it is. Well, I also remember my brother's toothache was treated with the recipe from this book. Dad wrote out some kind of prayer in his notebook. My brother read it a couple of times and the pain went away. Of course, it would probably have been better to go to the dentist, but my parents were already crazy. Here are a couple of stories from a stranger. In a family home, my sister and I were sitting alone. We lived in a village with our grandmother at the time. The living room window looked out onto a hill. And so my sister and I were staring out this window during the day, and there were fucking 4 dots circling in one place. I don't know how to describe it, well, like insects flying to the light, that's how they were circling over the hill. We were shocked, ran for the camera, and when we returned, these dots were gone. Well, then we were pretty bricked. The second story happened to me last Sunday. So I'm going to the bathhouse, yeah, I live in a private house, in the evening, well, it's dark and shit. And then I hear a sound like fireworks are being launched. Okay, I think, I'll keep going. And then there, fucking, right above the bathhouse, 3 huge red dots were slowly coming towards me. Well, they were descending in my direction. They were also making a sound, well, I don't know how to describe it, as if the sound had been recorded and slowed down, a kind of grinding and whistling. I ran towards the house and fell on my ass on the ice. I ran home and started looking out the window. But there was nothing there. I forgot about the bathhouse and washed myself on Monday. That's it. Anyway, I've been working as an ultrasound specialist for 4 years. And then one day, during an ultrasound of the testicle, a face appeared on the screen. A fucking human face. By the way, the guy himself is 45 years old. He went to the clinic complaining of pain in the scrotum. The urologist referred him to me. And I saw this. Do you see this, Anons? You can't help but notice it. In short, the guy had a benign tumor in his scrotum, which was already removed by surgeons. But I'll still publish a photo of that very face from the screen. By the way, I even called my colleagues. They laughed there, some were so amazed to see the outline of a human face looking out of the screen that they opened their mouths, and one even said that this face seemed to belong to a person directly suffering from epididymochitis, inflammation of the testicle and its appendage. Then someone else mentioned that the image somewhat resembled the face of a deity, possibly Mina, the Egyptian god of maleness. This also got a good laugh. But such bullshit would not have worked for either a consultation or a medical history. In general, it's funny when someone's balls are paranormal. There are several stories. The first. When I was in Sosnetsky, in the 5th or 6th grade, I had a blue handball. I don't remember how, when, and under what circumstances I got it, or where it came from, it was just always there. It became one of my favorite toys, because it was quite dynamic. I could throw it at anyone and at any wall of my house, just playing with a ball. And this is just a story about a small toy from my childhood, which everyone has in one form or another. So one day I lose the ball, and any attempts to search for it lead to nothing. I threw it and thought that eventually it would find itself, which is what actually happened. The thing is, when I found it, the ball was next to another blue ball of the same type, looking exactly like this one. No, it was not another ball of the same type, it was an absolutely perfect copy of the ball I had lost. The same scuffs and marks, and it had the same writing on it, a number written in black marker, at least I remember several, in the exact same handwriting as the other one. When I realized this, my head started spinning and I couldn't distinguish reality. Damn, it had to be weeks to months old. Something weird happened when I found the second ball, like it was a glitch in reality. Neither of my parents knew where it came from, and none of my friends knew either. Eventually one day, both balls disappeared and I never saw them again. I still find it weird when I think about it. 2. One night I had a weird dream that I can't remember, and then I woke up just as the light came on. Even though I always turn it off when I go to bed. What was illuminating the room was a bunch of symbols all over my ceiling and walls, in a circle, glowing something or other. Alternating red and blue. I could read them, but I was so fucked up at the time that I couldn't understand them. And when I laid down, I felt a very strong presence, like some powerful nex was chasing me. However, this presence wasn't filled with malice or bad intentions towards me, it was peaceful and controlled. 3rd. So, this happened a while ago. My friend and I were chatting on Steam. He was a total newbie paranormalist back then and he was very interested in tulpas. I asked him why he wanted a tulpa. He thought I was kidding. But he said that he only wanted one thing from her. First and foremost, sex. I tried to argue, but he wouldn't. He just wanted his tulpa's pussy. He told me he was looking for instructions on how to forcibly tulpa so he could fuck her like the ideal woman. He said he failed for some reason. I'm curious. He says his life is in shambles now. He gets bad grades. No one talked to him because he was constantly pestering everyone with sex with his imperfect and twisted tulpa. I never talked to him again, by the way. They said he ended up in a mental hospital, supposedly running out naked on the street covered in something. 4th. I once saw a video on YouTube a couple of years ago. It was filmed with a home camera, and it featured two guys who both spoke Spanish. I even thought they were Mexican, but whatever. They were exploring some old haunted building, and there were some really creepy things happening to them, including shooting a ghost. I couldn't find it. I just remember the video was pretty long, maybe even 15 to 25 minutes. I'll write my own true story. I was a little brat back then, 8 to 9 years old, so I don't remember any special details, but that's not the point. So, that day, my sister, parents and I went to visit some family friends. We were sitting there, in short, sitting, the parents had already had a good drink, so my sister and I decided to go home, because it was boring. Luckily, our house is about 10 minutes from our friend's house. The point, my sister and I go into the apartment, it was about 11 p.m., talk about something, and then my sister says that she hears some sounds. We fell silent and I started hearing them too. The sounds were coming from the living room. There, with its back to the wall, there was a sofa. The sound was like someone was scratching the back of the sofa with claws. We had a cat then, and of course we thought it was her, and immediately started trying to drive her out of there with all sorts of words like shoo, scat, etc. We were standing there, shouting at the sofa, and then that same cat came out from behind our backs. Well, that's when we were really shocked. Since the cat was with us, there was no one else to scratch the sofa, because we didn't have any other living creatures. We didn't risk looking behind the sofa, because it was creepy. The sound continued for another 5 minutes, maybe a little more, I don't remember. Before this incident, and after that, Nothing like that had ever happened. That's how things are, uneasy face. Sap Anon. Writing a cool story. Happened to me 3 times already and still can't figure out what the hell. What's the gist? I was coming home quite late a few times. The first time I saw a man dressed entirely in black and with his face covered. I thought he was probably some fashionista or a member of some subculture. It doesn't really matter. It would seem that everything was fine. By the way, Anon, there were only me and him on the street at that moment. Naturally, he became the object of my close attention, since I'm kind of paranoid, and anyway, we were looking into each other's eyes, Anon, but I didn't see his eyes. Seriously, I just felt that our gazes met. And then I accidentally blinked and he disappeared. Seriously, he just up and disappeared. The second time happened a couple of months later. In the same place, at about the same time. I have to pass there almost every day after 2200 hours, I saw him. The incident was similar, he disappeared again when I blinked. This time the lull was not long. It happened a couple of weeks later. This time I was riding home on my skateboard and saw him again. This time I decided to stop and, without blinking, began to look at him. He was standing, how can I explain it, at the exit of the arch leading to the courtyard of a 9-story building, which from above resembles the letter G. I managed to see only the lower part of the face. The skin was paler, probably, than that of a corpse, and I could not really see the mouth. Our visual contact continued until the car left this arch. He disappeared when the car touched him. So, Anon, who could it be? Or what? Better not. I live in Khanty-Mansisk Autonomous Okrug in Nyagan. There is taiga, bears, and other crap abound. There was a story. I was walking home from work and decided to cut through the forest. It was not too late then, about 10 in the evening, but already quite dark. So I was walking through the forest and heard someone screaming. I ran in one direction, the sound went to another. I ran in the other direction, the sound went back. So I ran for about half an hour through this fucking forest, until I came across some kind of pieces of fabric, barely visible from under the snow. I started throwing snow, dug up the girl, called the cops, and it turned out that this girl had been missing for a year. They say that there are a lot of such cases in this forest, about 10 missing people per year, all sorts of old grannies and other shit. Say that when the city did not yet exist, but there was something like a village. In this area some fucking big bear was beating people up, tearing them to pieces. As a result the bear was beaten up, but the grannies say that it was the spirit of the forest, LOL, taking revenge for the bear. Well, this nonsense about the alleged revenge of nature, that's how things are. How so? The most common: if you open the mirror in the dark, there broda. Burnt smell in the spectrum on the old chair where snakes curl up. They stink, and yellow slime on the threshold. Do not sleep, do not give, zero will crush as in the depths. The skull crunches like snow, you remember snow, it is delicious like sugar, glitters with blue sparks. And behind the threshold black 7. Never lived as if a skilled doll walks exactly, but as if on notes a running child hides from black scary fuck and looks into the eyes. I want to go home, and you repeat the name of the unknown 100 times and he cries whistling. Hisses like a snake and there is none left. And why call if you literally want to be saved at any moment nearby? Advises and shut up, she Mary Chapo Sasha do not open, and a cigarette was saved. There is only no business and moves like an underwater arrow, clicks Ratty Cosmos. And I would hesitate. The main thing is to look at the amalgam, only the words run away into yellow. We've already drunk this story a couple of times, both here and in BOL. Anyway, I'm studying in another city. And I decided to rent an apartment with some friends. An ordinary 2-room apartment, with Soviet style, but fairly neat repairs. We lived like that for a couple of months, nothing special. it seemed. But then the strange things started. The first warning sign. We were going to bed one day, and suddenly we heard some knocking in the kitchen. We jumped up. After all, it's the first floor, you never know, maybe some drunk decided to try to climb in. And there was a loaf of bread lying a meter from the table. The bricks fell out a little, but nothing more. We were shocked and went to bed. But then, more. Periodically, the doors to the bathroom and toilet began to close with the inner latches. They tried to break in, they just shook the door, and tried to pry it with a knife. In the end, they decided to just hammer it in. And after 5 to 10 minutes, the door opened again calmly. Objects continued to fly off the table. Constant strange rustling sounds. The guys living in the next room constantly complained that when they went to bed, they saw some kind of flickering shadow in the hallway. And another strange thing, sometimes all four of them were overcome by a wild feeling of panic. Abruptly, for no reason, at one moment. When you just wanted to run away to an unknown place, but as far away from here as possible. In general, everything would be fine, and we would continue to blame everything that was happening on mice, drafts, and bad furniture, if not for one incident. Once, going out for a smoke, we met a young couple in the entrance. Word for word, we got acquainted, got to talking. But when they found out what apartment we were from, they immediately became gloomy and advised us to move out quickly. They say that the apartment has a bad reputation throughout the entire building. In the end, as it turned out, the owner of the apartment burned down in it about a year ago. He simply fell asleep with a cigarette. And all the subsequent tenants somehow did not end up very well. One of them had an arm found, and the couple who lived directly before us crashed to their deaths 2 months after they moved in. Well, we of course argued with the story, thought that they just wanted to scare us, and forgot about it. And then, one day, for the sake of interest, we decided to check by cutting a piece of wallpaper in the supposedly burnt room. And yes, anon, there was a wall black with soot underneath. And then, rummaging through the closets, we found a bag with this guy's burnt documents. We nicknamed him Cole, tried to get in touch, LOL, sometimes we talked. He was an asshole, of course, and didn't get in touch. Actually, that's how we lived for about 8 months. Among other oddities, some of the girls who came to visit at night, yeah, to fuck, had real hysterics, and they couldn't explain what was going on. And I, especially when everyone left and I was left alone in the apartment, had very strange and realistic nightmares, after which I woke up in a sticky sweat. That's the story, anon. Sorry for the crooked style, I didn't sleep all night. I remembered one story. It was in 2010. Summer, I, still from Sosnetsky, was suffering from idleness and wasting my vacation in line. In general, everything is like everyone else. Well, one day my stepfather decided to take me with him on a night fishing trip, so that I wouldn't waste my summer so desperately, and I, in turn, took my best friend with me. No sooner said than done. The place was an hour's drive from our backwater, an ordinary lake, a field on one side, a forest on the other. A little further away, the nearest shitty village was about 5 kilometers away. No cemeteries nearby, or any other creepiness. So, as soon as we arrived, the weather began to deteriorate sharply. Without thinking twice, we pitched a tent, threw out our nets, and had just finished when a fucking hurricane hit. My stepfather, under the pretext that we wouldn't be leaving in the morning, went to sleep in the car in this very village, promising to return after everything was over, and we stayed in the tent to watch the nets. What followed was complete fucking hell, though there was nothing supernatural about it. Lightning flashed so brightly that it was as bright in the tent as day, and the wind tried to blow it down right along with us. We, cursing and praying to all the gods, somehow tried to hold it. I thought that in reality we would either be carried away somewhere to hell, or slapped by lightning, because there were no high ground or any trees nearby. We really shit ourselves then, but that was only the beginning. About an hour later, the hurricane ends. About 2 a.m., deathly silence, only the fish are thrashing in the nets. My brother and I are sitting and trying to catch our breath. And suddenly we hear footsteps in the distance, from the road. Naturally, we thought that my stepfather had come, but just in case, I decided to call my mother and clarify. And she said that he had decided to stay in the village and would only be here in the morning. And at this point, bricks started falling out of our ass. Simple logic said that no normal person would walk several kilometers along a washed-out road at night, and there were no other fishermen that night. At this time, the footsteps were heard getting closer and clearer. And after the footsteps came very close, and, judging by the sound, someone had circled the tent a couple of times, the bricks began to fall like a mountain. There was no response to the cry of Ipe to Black Totem Nawi either, but the footsteps died down. By the way, my brother was a healthy hog of almost 100 kilograms, we were both into martial arts at the time, and I had a knife. So, we decided to get out and see what the fuck was going on. We get out and just start yelling, because we see a white figure hanging over the lake. It was hard to confuse it with fog, and it was also unlikely to be a reflection of the moon. Just some kind of hanging translucent shit, which after 10 seconds began to slowly melt, and after 20, disappeared completely. How we spent the rest of the night, probably, is not worth saying. A pack of cigarettes was smoked in 20 minutes, we did not go into the tent for the rest of the night, nervously walking back and forth and twitching at every rustle. In the morning, we quickly packed everything up, waited for the car, and got the fuck out of there. That's basically the whole story. If we go through all the creepy stories involving NEH that happened to me, then only one deserves attention. It was about 5 years ago, spring 2011, or fall, it doesn't matter. I looked out the window in the evening, it was 6 to 7 o'clock, I looked towards the thread factory. Well, just to get some air. I see, fucking hell, a real NEH is happening. A perfectly smooth orange ball is slowly rising from the direction of the thread factory, the fireball covered its trajectory at its peak in about 10 seconds. The trajectory resembles the trajectory of a signal flare, the thread factory is abandoned, they can play airsoft there, but it is excluded, because it was flying slowly for such crap and was huge in size, you can compare it to the size of a large moon in the sky during a full moon. This junta scared me, so I went back to the room and did not want to watch this anymore. By the way, my typical reaction to everything creepy and unfamiliar. A minute later I came back to look and find a logical explanation. It is clear that there were no traces of the incident left. At the peak there is an approximate description of the incident and the place in the summer of 2015, though from the loggia, not from the window. The window is to the right of the place of the photo. I have not found any logical explanations to this day. In short, one, as a child, I liked to spend the night on the balcony, watch the satellites flying past. I only learned then that stars can fly, and these are satellites. I didn't pay attention before, and fresh air in the stuffy summer heat after all. I look at the sky, and there are 6 to 7 stars flying at the same speed without a sound at a distance of a little finger from each other, if you stretch out your arm. I thought that these were satellites flying in a flock. And then, a few years later, remembering this story, it became suspicious that satellites can fly together in one direction without any difference in brightness. It can be assumed that this group of satellites ended up together due to the coincidence of orbits and speeds, like a parade of planets, only satellites. I don't know. 2. There you could often see at 2 to 3 a.m. how young guys run after running girls. This is not exactly from the paranormal section, but still creepy. This happened almost 3 to 4 times a week. Until now, when people have shit, they try to run through my dark yard. Dumbass. 3. Once we were grilling shashlimasi at our dacha, on the river bank, Krasnoyarsk, Yenisei. It was also summer, and at about 2 a.m. a foggy cloud flew along the river faster than the current. There was no fog on the river, it appears only early in the morning. And its density was higher than that of ordinary fog. I don't know if I screwed it up or not. I don't remember exactly. For I read about my dacha in some book, a collection of creepy stories. They write that some hairy people ran along it, then still a KGB dacha, now there are FSB dachas there, lol. In fact, it's not very creepy, but it was amusing. Probably drunk Dagestani majors ran after the bathhouse and scared people. 5. As a child, when I was 4 to 5 years old, I could watch some Omsk cartoons on the wall. I would even wake up my dad and say, "Look, Dad, what the fuck, cartoons are showing on the wall, huh? Why are you lying there like a dumpling, let's watch cartoons." Everyone watched them in the villages. And he would play along or something like that, I don't remember. All my attention was focused on the wall. Then I lost this ability. 6. When I was in Sosnitsky, after school my mother would bring me home and then go to work again, and for several years I would pass out in front of the TV like that. When switching channels, you could stumble upon untuned ones, and there was just white noise. If you looked closely enough, you could notice the outlines of some geometric shapes or lines. Most likely, it was imagination, when people hear the voices of the dead on the radio. 7. In the same house, when I was alone, the sounds of falling dishes could be heard from the kitchen. When I came, nothing fell. That seems to be all, I'll remember something else later. I work in an office like a research institute. Our department on the floor is assigned 2 offices at opposite ends of the corridor. We sit in one, the second contains equipment worth millions, literally. Everything is strict with passes, there are electronic locks everywhere. At the entrance to the territory, in the building itself, and on each floor, entry is only by electronic cards. The offices on the floor itself have no electronics, regular locks. Every morning the cleaner washes them and leaves the doors open so that the floors can dry. About 2 hours later, she closes the uninhabited ones, like ours with the equipment. The offices are small, square with 1 or 2 windows on the 3rd floor. Strangers are not allowed on this floor, so every morning all the doors are open. By the way, the corridor is narrow and dark. There is almost no light in it, apparently they are saving money. About 2 weeks ago, I arrived at work. I arrived earlier than everyone else, no one was there yet, and the cleaner had already washed everything and left, the doors were open. I'm walking to my office, passing by our warehouse. I meet some unfamiliar guy all in black and a hat. A couple of meters before meeting me, he turns into our warehouse, where there's a shitload of equipment. My first thought, why the hell did some idiot enter our office? I go there a second later to ask him the same question, there's no one there. At all. An empty room, just a closet with suitcases and devices, and not a soul. In shock, I even looked into the closet and tugged at the windows, everything was closed. Just in case, I checked the control panel, no guest passes were issued. On this floor, no one except me and the cleaning lady had checked into the system. I wrote it off as glitches from lack of sleep, but, fuck, I saw the guy, as clearly as I could. Never in my life have I been so shocked as I was that day. A village story. I tried to write it as a fictional story, but it turned out to be crap. I spent my summers in an urban-type settlement. Small and quite cozy, behind the brick 2-story buildings that abundantly dotted the foot of a large hill. Going down, you found yourself at private houses, one of which belonged to my aunt. And at the very remote from civilization end of the settlement there was a swamp. Few people came here, due to the complete uselessness of this place, a feeling of dampness in the air, dilapidated abandoned houses, all this attracted only fishermen who came here to dig up worms. And local boys, with whom I hung out. Even in my aunt's school days, some houses at this very end of the village began to empty little by little. The swamp had grown to such an extent, the river was nearby, plus, groundwater flowed down the hill, plus the wind was an infrequent guest, many reasons, in general, that several yards were already in line to be buried in this cold green quagmire. Now you can still see their depressing looking remains sticking out above the green space. One house, according to my aunt, was already completely covered. And the tendency to resettle continued. Few wanted to live next to the tireless croaking of frogs and hordes of midges. Only lonely grandmothers remained, humbly living out their days. One of them, by the way, was alive until recently. No, of course, she was still a young woman then. She decided to save the yard left by her mother. But the old man who lived in the completely sunken house disappeared in it. Having gone to live with relatives, the grandfather never calmed down, coming to his former home every day. So, one day, he did not return from the memory watch. Naturally, they found him in the swamp. About a year passed, when the next misfortune happened. A young guy rode into the swamp on a motorcycle. Why? God knows. They wrote it off as drunk. He went after the house, which a few weeks before had already moved to a new foundation. And the situation repeated itself several more times. As soon as the house began to suck into the quagmire, its former owner ended up there too. Although Soviet people were taught to believe only in Lenin and the party, mystical fear was successfully cultivated in the hearts of the inhabitants. But then the emotions subsided. Generations changed, and the swamp calmed down. The story turned into just an interesting tale, and for small children, an instrument of intimidation to discourage them from spending time there. But the most interesting moment was the story about the local shepherd. He also drowned in the swamp, although his house was on the other side of the village. And this is what he became famous for. He swore up and down and accused that old woman of witchcraft. He was walking from the neighboring village to look at the pic-related map, and decided to go out onto the road, since there were lanterns there, and it was better to walk than to comb the grass, which was knee-deep. He passed by the swamp and saw that old woman standing and patrolling near the swamp and mumbles something incomprehensible, throwing around who knows what. He called her, like, "What are you doing, old woman?" In response, zero, and he opened heavy fire from a traumatic gun. He went home surprised. Then he began to tell everyone. And once, catching up with a goat that wandered near the swamp, the shepherd stumbled in the wrong place, and got sucked in. The granny died about 2 years ago. There were no relatives. And even if there were, they hardly remembered her. I'll tell you about the scariest story in my life. It happened in a dorm, around 2002. That night, my roommate and I watched a movie and went to bed, me on the top bunk, him on the bottom. My roommate fell asleep pretty quickly, and I started to fall asleep too. Half asleep, I turned my teeth from the wallpaper to the TV, and then I had the creepiest sleep paralysis that could ever happen. In a dark room, in complete silence, on the turned-off TV, I see the outline of a person's face. I was simply fucking paralyzed. The face was barely visible, it looked more like a glitch or some kind of noise, but it was moving, or rather, it was trying to say something. This ghost opened and closed its mouth, as if trying to plant something in my soul. I wasn't just paralyzed, I felt a grave chill. "Neighbor, bitch, wake up." I wanted to scream, but my jaw and throat were seized with a spasm and I could only wheeze. I just fucking realized that if I don't wake up my neighbor now, In the morning he will find my cold corpse with a torn heart on the bed. I wheeze, tears are rolling from my eyes from fear, I can't move, and this mug on the CRT appears more and more clearly. Now you can see the holes where the eyes are, now you can make out long hair, now you can see that the lips are saying something, now in the corner of the screen in the noise of bright flashes the logo of MUTS TV appears. In short, some fucking cockroach laid his body on the altar of contacts, short-circuiting the circuit, and turned on the image of some video clip at minimum brightness. That's when the paralysis immediately let me go. I got off with shaking legs, pulled the TV plug out of the socket and, chattering my teeth from inertia, crawled under the blanket. The neighbor, the bastard, never woke up, missed all the fun. We later fixed the TV with a kick and a couple of blows to the body, and since that night I have several gray hairs on my right eyebrow and a dislike for long-haired singers of the national stage. A year ago I stayed overnight at a classmate's house who lived next to a cemetery, apparently one of the largest in Europe. We ate all the pizza, watched funny videos, had nothing better to do, and decided to go to the cemetery in the middle of the night, especially since he claimed that he had gone there with friends a couple of days before and seen some kind of scary dug-up grave with a broken tombstone. Inspired by this, we happily ran towards the creepy place. We wandered around the cemetery for about an hour, looking into every crypt in search of at least a homeless person. We didn't find anything, didn't see any ghosts. We decided to reach the last lantern and turn back. The path went through a fairly flat area, without tall trees or monuments, only small bushes around. And then, next to the next bush, someone fucking growled at us, not a dog, not a person. A dog doesn't growl like that at all, and it would probably have barked, but this was a long growl, and a person wouldn't have fit in those narrow, low bushes. I understand that it doesn't sound scary at all, but how I shit myself then. Damn, we shone our flashlights into those fucking bushes, there was no one there, and the fucking creepy growl continued. Then without saying a word we ran the fuck out of there, without turning around. A friend later described it as mooing for some reason, although to me it was just a growl, like the monsters from cheap old games. Who knows what kind of shit that was, but I haven't been there since and I won't go back. Recently I had to go at night to pick up a friend who stayed out late. I had to go home. I left the car on the road next to a field. There used to be fields all around, but now they've built up everything except this area, because springs beat there and therefore it's expensive to drain a small dirty lake. Being a dick about 20 years ago I swam in it, and now it's shallow and has become fucking dirty. A couple of alcoholics and kids drowned in this lake. One kid was skating for a fee, swam to the center and drowned. The second was skating in the winter and went under the ice. Now no one swims there anymore, but alcoholics and dog owners are found. And now about the story itself. I left the house at 3 a.m. and headed to the car. The cigarettes were in the glove compartment, so I started the car and decided to smoke nearby while the car warmed up. I'm standing there, smoking, and suddenly I hear children's laughter coming from the lake. Out of curiosity, I start looking at the field and notice two children's figures running near the water. I immediately got scared. It's a cold autumn night, and next to a stinking pond, there are children playing tag alone. I started watching them. The children didn't run for long, because I almost smoked one cigarette. One of the kids ran up the steep slope near the water and jumped into the water, and the second one, catching up with him, found himself on the hill a little later. The one chasing him laughed loudly and disappeared into thin air. I didn't go to that field anymore, although a drunkard I knew invited me to sit there on a pipe, drink beer, and remember my youth. He also told a story about how he saw drunks drinking under a birch tree, and then it turned out that these drinkers bought a bottle of moonshine a couple of years ago and died from it there. I can't say that creepy things have ever happened to me in my life, but strange stories have happened to me. Here's one of them. About 2 years ago, I think, I was participating in an AM on COS with 4 guys, so we were putting together a conference in Skype to chat, but Skype, as usual, went nuts and 2 guys couldn't get into the created voice group. So, there I am, my friend and his friend, whom I practically didn't know. I don't even remember what we were chatting about while waiting for those 2, but at some point my friend flew out of the voice group and then came back. I wouldn't have paid any attention to his return if after that he hadn't started saying something in a Tyanksa voice. I persistently asked him to turn off clownfish or some other bullshit that he could use, but he ignored all my requests. The joke dragged on and I started yelling in the voice group and at his friend, who replied that he himself didn't understand what was going on. The chick was still ignoring us. We started writing to those 2 dudes that there was some kind of bullshit going on, but then the most sudden juicy thing happened. In short, it turned out that my friend was already sitting in a parallel voice group with those 2 dudes, LOL. Well, the dude and I were a little freaked out and began to listen to the chick with curiosity. At that point she was no longer saying anything, but just humming Valenki Valenki for about 15 minutes, and then we sent everyone to hell and tried to leave the voice group, but when trying to re-edit it, we were constantly thrown to this thread. In short, re-logging into Skype helped. That's it. Most likely, we were just thrown into someone else's voice, but who the fuck knows. It didn't sound like a conversation, she was just fucking humming something. I'm not entirely sure about Valenki, but a friend of mine made a 20-second recording, which we then sent to several dudes, one of whom said that she was humming Valenki Valenki. By the way, about the recording, he uploaded it to YouTube, but didn't bother to give it a normal name, so I fucked it up a long time ago, but there is a chance that I will still be able to find it, if anyone is interested. I was very little then. Anyway, I'm standing in the room, doing something. It happened a few times, then it stopped. Anyway, I'm doing something. I wasn't alone in the room. My mother, grandfather, grandmother were there. My father was nearby, but it was as if they didn't notice. Anyway, I'm sitting in the room and looking at the door, well, just briefly, and a couple of times I notice the scrap. Well, now it seems to me and I think, what kind of crap was that? But then it seemed to me that it was normal. Anyway, I was looking at the door and noticed that from above there was something looking at half the body, something with coffee-colored skin, well, brown like coffee with milk, no mouth, ears, nose, or hair, only 2 black calm eyes. There was a cape on the body, a mantle, or something, multicolored silk. As soon as I noticed it, it hid. It happened a few times. Approximate drawing above. What do you think it was? I'm telling the creepiest stories because of which, apparently, my breasts stopped growing. The first one. I was 5 to 6 years old, we lived in an old house, built by German prisoners of war. The apartment was a 2-room apartment and a very long corridor led to my room. I lived on the outskirts of everyone, it turns out. Every evening before going to bed, my mother came to me and stroked my head, and I peacefully closed my eyes. One evening, my mother came to me in her terry robe and sat not at my head, but at my feet, slapping her knees with her hand, like calling dogs LOL. Well, without thinking twice, I turned over, put my head on her, she stroked it and left. I lay back down, lying there, unable to sleep. About 15 minutes pass, my mother comes in again. I tell her, like, you were just here, what again? To this, my mother replies to me that she was in the bathroom for about 40 minutes and hadn't come to me yet. There were a lot of bricks. In the same apartment, I had a shelf above my bed and on this shelf stood my porcelain dolls, and one night, without declaring war, such a doll fell on my face. No jolts, the bitch stood normally all the time, and then somehow flew. In general, from that day on, I began to have an abnormal reaction to this doll. Before I only played with it and did not let go of it, but after that night, I saw something out of the ordinary in it. As a result, I got hysterical and locked this doll in another room when I was alone. Begged my parents to burn it. The second. I was 11 years old, we moved with my parents and a newborn brother to a new apartment, in the same area that we had lived in before in more or less the same house. From the very first day, I walked around the apartment and grimaced. I organically did not like it there. The younger brother began to grow up, my discontent and discomfort in the apartment remained. My little brother's toys were naturally always in my room. At night his radio-controlled toys could drive, toys that said I love you when pressed, could go on for hours. Once the little one was lying on the couch with his mother and pointed to the corner of the ceiling and said "Uncle is watching." My mother had as many bricks as in the whole house. We had a combined bathroom and toilet. I was washing a watermelon in the bathtub, my mother was sitting on the toilet, a common occurrence for me and my mother. I get up with this watermelon, exchange some phrases with her and then just fucking out of the wall, next to my mother, a ball flies out, small, like a soap ball, but denser and not so transparent inside, flies past her and not far from me just disappears with a pop. What it was, we don't know to this day. Soon we moved out of there to a newly built house and no fucking trouble was noticed there. The third. The most ugly one in my life. I lived in a dorm in Europe. There were 4 of us in a block, 2 in one room and 2 in another. One time we were sitting in the hallway at the entrance to our block in the evening and for fun we were shouting out all the names of the devil that we knew. In general, after living for 1.5 to 2 months more or less calmly, with rare cries of who stole this or that, we came to the conclusion that there was a ghost living in our block because at night we heard stomping in the area of our kitchen, small things were disappearing, things were not where they were left. We decided to appease this creature, a nonce, if only we knew that this is not a fucking thing to do. So we poured some milk into a bowl, took a slice of bread and decided to put it in the pantry because for some reason we decided that that was the ghost's lair. We put this bowl down and, I swear to God, the milk just starts bubbling before our eyes. Having pretty much shit ourselves, we closed the door to the pantry and left everything as it was. Then the paranormal activity started to intensify. It was really scary to be in the block alone. Electrical appliances turned on and off whenever they wanted. Towels, things on the dryer, everything always ended up on the floor. From the pantry we heard knocks and sounds like dishes breaking. This lasted for 2 to 3 minutes. Armed with a mop, we opened the door and discovered that everything was in place as always. The food spoiled in a couple of days. Before my eyes, a flower with a pot fell from the table, the doors themselves opened without a draft, a waterfall poured from the ceiling in the toilet. After running to the neighbors upstairs and back, there was no more water on the floor. The creepiest thing happened one evening when 2 neighbors went home for a week and we stayed in the block, realizing that it wasn't a brownie. We had salt by each bed. I don't know why, someone read it somewhere, salt was sprinkled by each threshold. It's calmer that way, lol. Anyway, I'm lying there sleeping, daytime naps are still a thing, and I wake up from someone breaking into the room, at the door, and our doors were Soviet era with a translucent glass insert. The light was on in the hallway and I looked at the glass, and there was nothing there, but sounds and the door was shaking. It didn't last long, I chalk it up to sleep paralysis. Anyway, after that shit, I moved out. I'm writing my story. It happened about 3 years ago. I live with my parents in a 2-room apartment. My grandmother came to visit us and slept in my room. It was about 3 a.m. I was lying with my laptop, then decided to go pee before going to bed. I went to the toilet without turning on any lights. After doing my business, I opened the toilet door and, in fact, the whole situation happened. I opened the door, and the light from the toilet is the only source of light in the apartment. I open it and see my grandmother turning the corner of the hallway. That is, at that moment I thought it was my grandmother. It was like an ordinary person, with dark hair down to her shoulders, in something green, similar to a robe. That's why I decided that my grandmother was coming. It seemed to be a little hunched over and was looking at the floor rather than in front of itself. I didn't really get a good look, because at the moment the door opened, it just turned the corner. If you turn the corner in the hallway, then straight ahead there will be the front door, and on the left is my parents' room. Somehow, without a second thought, I immediately followed. I wanted to ask what Grandma wanted in their room. I turn the corner, no one, the door to the room is closed. I open the door to the room, my parents are sleeping and no one is there. I was taken aback. I go back to my bedroom, and Grandma is sleeping. I don't know why, but I wasn't scared at all. I lay down, analyzed this situation and only then realized that 1, there were no footsteps, 2, it turned too quickly and smoothly, 3, it didn't turn around at the bright light and noise of the door. It's logical that a person would reflexively turn around. I know for sure that I saw it. I clearly saw it with my own eyes. Now, 3 years later, it has already begun to fade from my memory and I have doubts that maybe I was just very tired then and it was a hallucination, but when I remember myself at that moment, I know for sure that I really saw it in a sober mind. I don't know what it was, a nonce, but it was one of the strangest events in my life. Nothing like that ever happened to me in that apartment again. I don't believe in paranormal activity, but it's fun to read, so I sometimes look into sleep. And here, I thought, let me write something. Again, my story is rather slightly creepy, nothing fantastic. Mostly because it's more likely a dream/sleep paralysis, which, by the way, has never happened to me before or since. In general, I was still very young then, maybe even preschool age. Now I can't remember. The fact is that I was still allowed to sleep with my parents in the same bed, while my brother was no longer allowed. And so one night, taking advantage of my privilege, I climbed into my parents' bed right between Mom and Dad and fell asleep comfortably. But I didn't get to sleep peacefully that night. I dreamed that I was playing in the yard. At that time we still had a homemade playground there, built by the neighbor opposite, not by her own efforts, of course, since she was already at an advanced age, but she was a very business-like old lady. Ladders, crossbars, posts, all made of unpainted wood, in appearance more reminiscent of some kind of obstacle course from a young fighter's course. And so I dream that I am running between all these wooden buildings and doing some other fascinating children's activity, when suddenly it turns out that it is already night outside, the onset of which I did not notice at all. Even though this is happening in a dream, darkness is still frightening at that age. But what scared me even more in the dream was the feeling of the presence of something creepy. And this something was clearly interested in me. I had already started to turn towards the house, and then it made contact with me. An evil voice addressed me either out loud or sounded in my head. It should be noted that both then and now, as I recall, its only clear characteristic was exactly this: evil. Not scary, monstrous, hissing or anything else. I knew for sure that it was evil. While I was running to my entrance, my heels flashing in the dark, this voice was trying, so you think, to win my trust and seduce me. It was telling me that I was the Prince of Darkness, that I should inherit the world or something like that. Ahead of the sarcastic laughter, I will say that I was still at a tender age then and had not yet entered the edgy teenager phase. This was much later. So, while I was running away, I suddenly woke up from this presence in my dream. When I woke up, I saw the ceiling above me and realized that I was lying on my back. There was no one to the left or right of me, although there should have been my parents sleeping peacefully. But when I looked down at my chest, on which I felt a strange weight, I found that it was sitting on me and was continuing to try to recruit me into the army of Satan or whoever it served. However, if anyone was hoping for a colorful description of the monster, I will have to disappoint you. It was just a clot of darkness, probably the size of a football, without clear outlines. Everyone knows the expression blacker than night, so that was exactly how it was described. Absolute blackness. Of course, this state of affairs scared me even more terribly than the nightmare from which I woke up. But I could neither call for help nor start running. Then I started rocking from side to side, as if wrapped in invisible ropes, or like a mummy, trying to throw off this lump of darkness sitting on me. And I succeeded, and as soon as I victoriously slapped my face on the pillow, I woke up for the second time. My parents were peacefully snoring on both sides of me. Oh, and I'll add a bonus. When I was probably even younger, I sometimes dreamed that some gnomes or goblins were marching into the bedroom, right from the slightly open door to the hallway, from where light from the kitchen was still shining, since my mother was not yet asleep at that time, but they were definitely horned. These horns were all I saw over the side of the bed. So, I only recently put this together with the fact that my mother once told me that I, while sleeping, got up on all fours in bed and turned towards that very edge of the bed, at my feet, shook my fist and said, "Go away, goat." Still supposedly in a dream. Actually, this is probably the most creepy thing that has happened in my boring life. If you don't count the recent repeated ringing of the doorbell at night. I wrote a lot, I didn't think it would be so long. I have a couple of simple stories that might interest someone. Although none of these stories seem really scary to me, they might still entertain someone. One, a story from my mother. My father went on a business trip, my older brother also went somewhere, only my mother and my about 2-year-old self are at home. Night. I wake my mother up with the words, "Tell him not to look at me." Even at that age, I learned to express my thoughts quite well, so such a simple phrase, uttered by a 2-year-old child in the middle of the night, could not help but make my mother immediately wake up and ask me again what I had just said. And I said, "Well, there's a man standing there," pointing my finger at a dark corner. Then, my mother says, she distracted me with some conversation and I quickly forgot about what I had said before. But, as she said, she was still scared for a long time by what I had said and how. 2. I'm about 5 to 6 years old. My older cousin and I spend the summer at our grandparents' in the countryside. My sister and I love to invent all sorts of mystical and criminal stories and act them out using the surrounding environment. And the environment was basically fertile for this. A village, a forest nearby, and a railroad there, but we weren't allowed to go there. The adults said that gypsies went there. We periodically heard some rumors that these gypsies had either killed or robbed someone, nothing surprising of course, but then this phantom threat was always with us. Another 100 meters from the house was an abandoned library. Or rather, what was supposed to become it, a small one-story brick box with several rooms and no windows installed. They built this structure for a very long time and persistently. I remember the builders came to us, asked for chairs, because for some reason they did not have any. But then they abandoned the construction, which was a common occurrence. Probably a third of all the houses in the village were unfinished, so under the hot summer sun the landscape reminded me of some post-apocalyptic future in which the house of my grandparents, finished, with trees and flowers in the yard, surrounded by a thick cast iron fence, was like an oasis for us. I may have gotten too carried away describing the peculiar details, but okay. So, one clear summer day, my sister and I were in the yard of the above described house and were thinking of something to do. Then we came up with the idea that we would be 2 agents who were sent here to investigate a murder. Then we had to figure out who we were looking for. Then we began to describe this wanted killer word for word. We decided that he drives a red car, wears dark glasses, is bald, and smokes cigarettes. At this time, we are standing by a fence, next to which there is a road. 5 minutes after we made up this story on the fly, we see a red car slowly driving past us. The driver's window is lowered and we see a bald guy in dark glasses smoking a cigarette inside. We spend several minutes in a stupor, watching the red car with the supposed killer slowly moving away. At this point, we finished this game. If anyone is interested, there are a couple more similar stories. When I was 15 and I went to the toilet, my father kept casually hanging around the toilet and asking, "Why are you so quiet? Why can't I hear you?" The first time I didn't answer, so he started banging on the door and shouting, "Why are you so quiet? What's wrong with you?" He started swearing, he never held back in his expressions, and saying that he would tear the door off its hinges. Of course, I was shocked by such inappropriate behavior. One day, I was sitting on the toilet and heard my father stand up and go quiet somewhere near the door. Suspecting something was wrong, I leaned forward, and there was a very wide crack at the bottom of the door. I looked through the crack, and there my father was standing on all fours and looking through the crack. Noticing that I was looking at him, he started again, "What's wrong with you? Are you nuts? What are you doing there for so long?" By the way, my father was always buying some herbs and filling the entire restroom with these bags, which gave it a distinctive aroma that made my head spin. He himself would lock himself in the restroom for a long time, 5 times a day. When I asked him why he needed these herbs, he would answer that they helped with an upset stomach. I began to seriously fear for his mental health, but my mother seemed not to notice these oddities. One day, when my father was not at home, I was sitting on the toilet and leafing through a magazine like Mertzelka, which we always had on the floor of the restroom. The apartment was quiet, and I could clearly hear the sound of water flowing through the pipes. But after a couple of minutes, I suddenly heard that this quiet flow was joined by another sound. I began to listen, without looking up from reading. It sounded most like something was moving through the pipe that ran along the wall at floor level. I heard either a rustling or a swishing sound, clearly moving along the pipe towards the toilet. At first I didn't pay much attention to it, but when the strange sound came very close to the toilet, I became nervous. Putting the magazine down on the floor, I turned my attention to listening. There was no way I was imagining the sound, whatever it was that was in the pipe. The rustling became louder as it got closer to me. And when the source of the sound began to move from the pipe to the base of the toilet, I heard a sharp sound, as if a knife blade had been drawn across porcelain. The sound came almost directly below me and affected me like a slap in the face. I jumped up in a fit of instant panic, ran away from the toilet and turned around. I still don't know whether it was just a game of a frightened mind or reality, but I remember exactly how I saw. There was something in the toilet. Something greenish, slimy, shiny, like a lizard's tail, sticking out of the drain. If I had remained sitting on the toilet, it would certainly have touched my soft spot. I saw this something for only a second, then it darted back into the drain, like a disappointed hunter who realized that the prey had escaped. Again there was a metallic ringing, then a familiar rustling was heard. Now it was moving back down the pipe. After that, for several days I was afraid to sit on the toilet in the apartment, and tried to go to the toilet only at school. At first I didn't tell anyone about this incident, but one evening, when my father came out of the toilet once again after a long stint, reeking of herbs, I couldn't help but ask, "Dad, did you hear something crawling through the pipe?" And I immediately regretted asking. My father looked at me with completely wild eyes and grabbed my shoulder. "Did you see it? Did it do something to you? Answer me." "No, I just heard a sound, as if there was something in the pipe," I hastened to answer. "Idiot, I'm telling you, you shouldn't sit on the toilet for so long," my father cursed loudly. Realizing that the conversation was over, I started to go to my room, but then he added after me, "Don't be afraid, son. A couple more days, and it won't bother anyone else." I'll kick it the hell out of our house, just don't bother me. That's basically the whole story. I never heard the rustling in the pipe again, or saw that slimy thing. The herbs soon disappeared from the toilet, and my father stopped knocking and interfering with the natural process. I don't know what was going on there, what the herbs were for, or how exactly my father banished that monster by locking himself in the room. But it seemed to have worked. P.S. My father died of a stroke when I was 20, so now I can't ask him. As for my mother, apparently she knew about my father's affairs, maybe she even saw that creature, but our relationship is strained now, and we live in different cities, so we won't be able to talk. I lived at a dacha, my friend and I had this tradition. Every evening as dusk fell we walked along a small asphalt road to another village. Only 3 people lived there, F***ck, and then higher up, to the cemetery and returned back. Along the way we told each other all sorts of cool stories and creepy things. It was a fucking great time, anon. On both sides of the road there were fields with tall grass or some places sown with wheat. And behind them was a dense forest that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. In short, several stories happened to us on these walks. One, we were walking somehow, and when we were halfway home we heard a scream in the forest somewhere very far away, not just a scream, but some kind of inhuman fucking noise. Like dinosaurs roar in the movies, I have never heard anything like that in real life. 2, we saw an orange flying ball that flew out of the forest about 50 meters from us at an insane speed, crossed the road and flew to another part of the forest. It was the size of a football in diameter, maybe a little bigger. It didn't glow. 3, we saw a guy running across a field, quite far from us, running from the direction of our village. We thought he was drunk and were laughing. Then the guy fell and didn't get up. We were a little dumbfounded and decided to see if he was dead. We went to the place where he fell, and there was no guy there. Now I even shit myself when I remember. By the way, the atmosphere that evening was some fucking creepy. Light fog, pine trees were moaning everywhere. In short, very strange shit. I remembered a cool one that really happened. I was about 15 years old. I often walked in the area of DS Pokrovskoye Streshnevo, or rather not even in the park itself, but near the canal from the Shchikinskaya side. There you walk along the highway, go up the stairs and there is the dam and the canal. The place is beautiful, couples with larvae are walking, runners, but not crowds of people. On the shore you can see that people are grilling shashlik, but I myself have never come across such companies. So, there is a path, on the left is a canal, on the right is a fence, a church and, it seems, an abandoned or unfinished hospital. It was a sunny day and not creepy at all. My friend and I are walking past this church and then we hear an old man screaming. It is not clear whether it was an old woman or an old man screaming. You know, such an old man's creaky voice, why couldn't you just sit in the churchyard? And then a whistle sounded, like from a supersonic bomber during training. Honestly, it felt like the grass around was flattened by the gust of wind and the whistle. My friend and I looked at each other, that is, one of us didn't have a glitch. We tried to see what was going on near the church. Of course we didn't see anything. We're still scratching our heads trying to figure out what it was. My friend's dad was telling me how he was once driving cows home on his motorcycle in the evening. He was driving them, it was already getting dark outside, and it all happened not far from the cemetery. He was riding along, when in the distance, closer to the cemetery, he saw an old woman. This old woman started waving at him, like, "Come here." He rolled up to her and saw an interesting thing. The old woman's eyes were glowing, as he described, with a bright green light. Without thinking twice, he quickly turned around and hit the gas in the direction of the village. Who the hell knows what that was? In general, Another post about the Taman forest. I had an uncle, he lived in the village with his mother, that is, my great aunt. One day, my grandmother asked my uncle to feed the pigs. The pigs were in a pen in the yard of the house. He took some soup, went out into the yard, when suddenly the pigs ran out of the pen and ran through the gate, which was open. In general, my uncle was shocked and ran after them. As a result, he got lost for 3 days. And they found him in that Taman forest. According to his stories, he only disappeared for 2 to 3 hours. He said that the pigs ran out and ran into this forest, and he ran after them. When he ran into this forest he lost them. When he was brought to the village, my grandmother attacked him with her fists. The whole point is that the pigs remained in the pen. That's how it is. Anyway, I'll continue. When I was 11 years old, I got lost in that forest, went with my granny to pick mushrooms, decided to separate it. It ended with me wandering around the forest for about 5 hours, screaming and crying. Then somehow I came to a familiar path and ran to the village. The creepiest thing was that when I had already reached the edge of the forest and turned around to look at the forest, I noticed, as it seemed to me then, a white or gray, it was already twilight and quite far away, shaggy monkey sitting on one of the trees and looking at me with one hand clinging to the trunk and the other dangling. I was completely exhausted and it didn't even really affect me. I just turned away and went to civilization. And there my granny was already in tears at the bus stop. Several other men followed me then. One of them was a hunter and says that there was not a trace of me anywhere in the forest. According to my grandfather, in the same forest in Soviet times there was a clay quarry or something like that. Workers there wanted to drill a well for themselves, but several people died. They say radioactive water flowed there. There are several craters in the forest, they say from meteorites. My mother is a journalist and in the 90s she even did a report for a newspaper. They took a photo of me in one crater in the middle of the forest. There were no trees, and inside there was some kind of trash like old aerosols. I even then thought that these were fragments of an alien ship LOL, and I was like the smartest one who found them. For many years in a row, a light was burning in the forest, far away, probably several dozen kilometers away. Every night from sunset to sunrise, it looked more like a fire than electricity. Once I went there with my grandmother, but did not notice anything. There is a village story about a treasure buried under some oak tree. Supposedly if you find an oak tree and start digging it will rain, then if you continue digging you will hear neighing. If you continue anyway a herd of horses will run at you. If you run away from them they will trample you, and if you continue digging they will run through you like ghosts and disappear. Once there was a pond there, but local rednecks out of hunger emptied it. That is, they drained the water and collected all the fish. The fucking animals didn't even think that the fish would never eat again. About 10 years later, my friends and I decided to have a barbecue with beer on the side of the pond. It was already dry there. We set it up, grilled. At about 3 o'clock at night we heard some fucking sound like croaking and howling at the same time. I've never heard anything like that. It was really loud. We were supposedly so fucking brave that we even shouted something back, but in reality everyone was scared. We gathered up the skewers, bottles, and left. We threw the uneaten shashlik on the ground. We came back a day later. There was no meat, which is strange. There were no traces on the rather soft soil either. Another story about the Taman forest, but not quite. My village is in the Omsk region, near a place known as Okunvo. If you don't know, Google it. Well, there's always some NEC there. My godfather told me a story. His friend went hunting alone. It was summer, everything was awesome. The man hunted and towards evening he came to a special house for the night. A small hut with a stove, matches and salt, etc. special for hunters. He settled in there, lay down on the bench, turned on the DVD player, like a laptop, and started watching movies. After some time, the calm summer nature began to change. The wind was heard, The birds stopped chirping. In general, it was not calm. The man didn't pay attention, and the hurricane was getting stronger. And suddenly the man hears such a distant singing, consonant, but incomprehensible. And then he freaked out. Fuck, taiga, swamps, no one can be here, even village idiots on moonshine won't come here. He turned off the DVD and started listening. The singing and music kept increasing, louder and louder, and he could already hear the sound of horses' hooves. He grabbed the trunk and sat down opposite the door. Fuck, as he said, he almost sat there. In the end, he heard the horses stop near the hut. And someone came up to the door and knocked. Knocked once. Twice. 3 times. The 4th time, someone knocked and said in a rough female voice, "Open up, we've arrived." He fucking laid some bricks there, thinking that now just a little more and he would start the call of duty. In the end, someone stood outside the door for a minute, the music and singing continued, and then walked away. And the man heard them start driving away. The further they drove, the more the hurricane died down and the singing became quieter. In general, when they completely fucked off, everything stopped. The guy sat there for a day, eventually came out with the bricks and didn't find any fucking glue from the cart or hoof prints, and this is a swamp, by the way. Well, he ran to the village. In the end, as they say, they were forest people, like Yeti, or whatever they are called. Well, my grandmother, my relatives also told stories about them, like there are a lot of funny things about them, and the internet tells the same thing about places with Okunvo. In general, and the guy got a gray spot on his head. That's how it is. If it takes off, I'll continue to saw the story. Something really shitty happened to me half an hour ago. I noticed that I was sitting not on a chair but on a pile of bricks. I woke up at 9 local time and turned on the oven as usual. At this time, my mother had either already left for work or was just getting ready. I went to the kitchen, saw the prepared breakfast and dragged it to my room. But then something weird happened. I heard footsteps in the hallway. The hut is just a hallway with rooms on the sides, and opposite mine is my mother's room. I immediately understood about the footsteps that she had gone to work, but I didn't even hear the sound of the door opening in her room. They were quite fast and clearly audible, walking back and forth, walking along the hallway about 4 times. Well, I didn't attach any importance to it. I thought that my mother was looking for something, and turned up the music louder. Half a minute later I heard the door to the room open. The PC is located right next to the wall opposite the door. That is, I am sitting with my back to the door. I turned down the volume on my PC and thought that now there would be the traditional "I'm going to work" or something like that. I never turn around when people enter my room because it's a usual thing. But I didn't hear anything. There was silence from the door for a few seconds. I was thinking about turning around, but then the door closed back. The door didn't open abruptly or anything like that, it just opened and closed. I clearly heard the handle turn and felt a small draft from the open door. I was already starting to doubt whether it was my mother. But then my doubts were confirmed. My mother came. My mother herself. She opened the door to the apartment, packed her bag, and ran down the hallway. It turns out she forgot her laptop for work at home. I ran out of the room and told my mother all this, but of course she didn't believe me, and you probably won't believe me either. Now I'm sitting alone at home, I didn't hear anything else, I'm scared to leave the room. Sorry for the possibly awkward text. My hands are shaking a little. I'll tell you about a pain that happened to me while I was serving in the army. It was in the so-called fields, more specifically the training ground in Chibarkul. Anon, you can Google this place. Actually, we were there as guards during the day, patrolmen at night. It was some kind of week, maybe less, to visit all sorts of generals of the Russian Federation, the CIS, and China, I think. If you Google the place, you will see the training ground itself, and a glass building on top of a hill. Everything behind it, as far as I know, did not get into Google. And behind it was the camp itself, with a shitty mountain of tents for meetings and practicing all sorts of military bullshit. The whole thing is surrounded by a forest, and nearby there is a small river separating the redneck soldiers from civilians. It seems that I described everything as it should be with the area. Actually, that's the very night I dumbfounded my comrade on patrol. You walk around the tents, along the tents, inside the tents, go around the entire territory completely. In general, if you fuck up completely, you can even fuck off and sleep somewhere on a table where some general will sit during the day. Having stolen food once again, which is so lacking during a fucking year of service, from a cap. A store in army slang. Full and happy, I went for a walk along the territory. Between the two of us, we had a flashlight and a baton, as far as I remember. The flashlight didn't really shine, since I had pressed the button myself, LOL, earlier. I don't remember what was going on with me at that moment when I heard a fucking child's, 90% lowly, crying in the fucking forest. The cry was followed by the sound of a chainsaw. Yes, Anon, I understand how it looks, another idiot came up with bullshit, but no. I wouldn't bother and write shit from my phone. So, a child's cry, girls, if anyone has ever heard it, they will understand. It also seemed to me that the child was running, the intonation of the cry was like movement. I'm in shock, what the hell am I supposed to do? I clearly wasn't going to run there alone, because why the fuck would I? I ran to my friend, and while I was running to him I realized that the sounds had stopped. I ran up to him, asked him if he'd heard that shit, and he said no, nothing at all. The sound was so loud that it was impossible not to hear it. I suggested that we go look at the forest, but he got scared and refused. I repeat, I wouldn't have gone alone. For a long time after that I thought about what the fuck that could have been. A father/wife with their daughter/granddaughter coming to get firewood. The training ground isn't fenced in with anything, and the forest even less so, civilians can get in there. I searched the forest during the day, and you can easily get to the village nearby. Is it a maniac who has a cellar in the forest like in The Lovely Bones? Or a fucking nex that tried to lure me into the forest and come out to eat me? Having googled this area later, I saw that many consider it wildly anomalous. Here's the story. So we had a dacha in the mountains, we live in Chikostan, I was still a kid. Well, we went there, built a bathhouse, built vegetable gardens, dug everything as usual. There was a river flowing nearby, 20 to 30 meters away. The river is tiny, in some places you can jump over it, we even swam in it. So there used to be a house on the river, but a mudslide came and smashed the house together with the man, it buried him there, in short. Only ruins stand now. Well, that's when we were hanging out with the guys on this fucking river. You were truly gripped by indescribable fear, and every single time. But you can't understand what you're afraid of. You just stand there and are silent for 5 minutes, and even when there were 2 to 3 of us or a fucking bunch of us, everyone felt the same thing. Until now, when I remember those feelings, I freak out in the same old way, as if a necessary flashlight lights up in my head that makes me feel an inexplicable fuck. We stayed overnight, went to bed. Well, I fell asleep and then for no reason woke up and saw a fucking ball, a real ball, hanging in the middle of the room and glowing blue. I don't know, the size of a mug. I was so shocked that I immediately closed my eyes in fear. And so I fell asleep. I didn't see anything strange in the city, but I saw a lot in the forest. Every summer I went to the village to visit my grandparents. I loved wandering around the forest, I sometimes came across old mine adits, abandoned roads, and winter huts, wells, a couple of times even small camps of various geological expeditions, and once I came across a road and went along it. I got my bearings by the direction. I realized that it goes in one direction to the river near the village, in the other to the top of the hill and rolls over it. I went up the hill, thinking I'll go a couple of kilometers and turn back if there is nothing interesting. The road was already overgrown with young trees and grass with bushes, but was clearly discernible in the forest. I climbed up the hill and saw that it goes to a clearing at the base of another hill. There seemed to be houses on it. I was happy. I went to this clearing, the road came straight to it, and the buildings themselves were on the opposite side of the clearing. I already understood this when I came out of the grass. The wheatgrass grass taller than me took up almost the entire clearing. I look, the barracks are standing in the shape of a T with its end towards me, built of round timber and dilapidated, old. The roof has partially collapsed inward. I looked from the entrance with a flashlight. It only shone on the bunks in two tiers near the walls. The floor is earthen and there is a blockage closer to the middle. Nothing interesting. I decided to go around. I went around to the left. I saw the entrance to the mine, and when I went around the corner, I stopped dead. Behind the barracks there is a log building with a sloping roof made of birch bark. The window is as good as new, gaping black, and I am standing there shitting bricks. Who the hell knows why? I just put the pallet aside. Goosebumps are marching along my skin and I can hear my heart pounding in my chest. I have never been so terrified, motherfucker. The seconds seemed like minutes, and I immediately ran out of there. When I ran out of the clearing onto the road, then it let go. It just let go, the shortness of breath and heartache after running, and the fear disappeared as if by magic. I adjusted my gun and thought, to hell with this place. I walk, thinking, there was no fucking grass, there was a wall of couch grass, and the ground near the buildings was bare, not a blade of grass. I was shocked, took the gun in my hands and, looking around, walked along the road to the river, and then I was shocked again. I realized that it was getting dark. Motherfucker, I got there at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I looked at my watch and ran from there. Already in the dark I came out on the road that goes to the village, and quickly got home. At home on the clock it was 12:30 at night, on my 3:40 in the afternoon. Grandma and Grandpa were sitting waiting. They scolded me, and when I asked about this place, they said that they did not know such a thing. And when I told them, my grandfather said not to go to this place anymore. Then I tried to find this road, but fuck, and in the village no one knows anything. You can't ask Grandpa anymore, and he didn't know anything, if even the old timers couldn't tell you anything. And I looked at the geologist's maps, there's nothing in that area, just forest. Google Maps also shows green stuff. And screw it. There was also a case. It was haymaking, a clearing 40 km down the river from the village. There was only one person left. Grandpa went to the village on business, and I stayed in the winter hut. By the way, Google and Yandex Maps don't show that hut, green stuff. So I decided to check the jugs on the lake, and reload. I took a gun and a dog, crossed the river in a boat and went to the lake. There was no path to it, the place was untrodden. The terrain was swampy. I had to follow the markers. The weather was wonderful, cloudberries like a carpet, a gun on my shoulder and a dog next to me. It was a pleasure to stomp. Came to the lake, a real forest lake, not those with beaches, but with overgrown banks, leeches, diving beetles. Those small ones in barrels are usually, in the lake they grow much bigger. When I first saw it I was really shocked. A whitish faded crab 3 to 4 centimeters in size, with water spiders. It is not advisable to swim. I checked the jugs. For those who do not know, a jug or a muzzle is a fishing trap. Loaded it again, crucian carp that I got into a bucket. Such a technology, a layer of moss, crucian carp on it, then moss and so on in layers to the very top. Pour water and the crucian carp can live for a long time. I finished this business and decided to fish with a rod. I sat until the evening, caught minnows, and went to the winter hut, released the crucian carp into the dam, and the minnows into the frying pan. Nothing interesting at night, but in the morning I went to the lake again to check the pots and found moose bones right by the lake. The lake is Moose Lake. They like to eat water grass, they often come there at night. There is a blind on the lake. In principle, there is nothing surprising. Bones sometimes come across in the forest, but the bones are fresh with scraps of meat, but there is no head, only a piece of antlers is lying nearby, scraps of skin, offal is torn apart, in short, a feast. The dog sits wary. I think the bear will definitely show up to the smell. I changed the shot for a bullet, quickly checked the pots, hid them near a snag, and I hear the dog bark. Well, I think Miss Ha has shown up, but no, lucky, the son of a bitch brought me a squirrel, and scared the shit out of me. Well, I went home, gave the dog the honestly obtained squirrel. But who can gnaw an adult moose in one night? The old man blamed the wolves, but he himself was surprised that the pack forgot in the lowlands. Packs usually go to the mountains for deer in the summer, and in winter you rarely meet them, usually loners wander around. It was scary then to spend the night in a winter hut alone. For 20 kilometers there was only you, and somewhere in the forest there was a pack of wolves or some other crap that ate the moose in one night. Fucking extreme. Okay, I'll write a couple of my stories. I can't say that they are about some kind of tall tale, demons with meter-long rods and so on, no, just some cases that really scared me, which happens quite rarely due to my absolutely indifferent nature. 1. Several years ago I went on a hiking trip along the river, if I remember correctly, along the Kia, which is in Altai. Actually, the hiking trip consisted of building rafts with a group and rafting on these rafts. The weather was very hot. I burned twice during the 2 weeks of rafting. It was in July-August, in short, it was just very hot. But there was one day, just extremely rainy. Just very. It was raining from the very morning, sometimes it started to hail. The group decided to disembark on a suitable bank, because it somehow didn't work out to float, enjoying chunks of ice in the face. The banks were sloping, rising 3 meters upwards, which was absolutely insurmountable for rafts, and we would have been pretty fucked up. However, at one fine moment, at about 6 in the evening, the rain suddenly stopped. No, not completely, we just swam across the border. Clear, as if outlined with a ruler, not moving anywhere. We were already happy, although it became pretty creepy. After about 6 kilometers, we swam out onto a rocky shore, completely consisting of pebbles. However, I did not see a single one smaller than my fist. The clouds in the sky were swirling, just like in cheap films about villains, above the tower of the maximum necromancer bad guy, although not so clearly, the spiral was clearly visible. There was no forest on this shore at all. There is taiga for hundreds of kilometers around, clay soils, and here there is a giant pile of stones. All the trees for 1.5 kilometers from the shore were fallen and almost completely broken off, the branches were broken and lying nearby. And yes, they were absolutely dry. There was no rain here, although the border where it began was clearly visible. As if we were in a circle where the rain simply could not go. Then we had fun, laughed, but now, when I remember, I get creepy. Also, it was at that camp that the instructor, cutting branches, cut his finger to the bone. 2. The second trip was much more dismal. We went to Katun, with the same group. There it rained for more than 10 days. You float for hours, from morning till night, not seeing another raft or a person. Out of despair, I began to pray to all the gods I knew. There was no dry clothes, no dry food, we spent the night in wet tents, there was nowhere to even dry things, so, and when I began to pray to God, the rain stopped. Immediately. 3. Well, in general, last summer I went mushroom picking many times. For regular ones, not those very ones. And every time I realized the scale, I became scared. There is not a soul around for tens of kilometers. At all. Nature rejoices, birds sing. I am alone. I felt this especially when I went out to a clear place where the horizon is visible. I read the book Birch Crosses instead of Iron on the advice of Anon, so, I think I understood the Germans. Endless fields, and beyond them more of the same and more. I had this happen to me when I was 6. My brother and I shared a room, but that day he went to see grandma and spent the night there. I slept on a bed right next to the door. My mother always left the door open. And since we lived on the 3rd floor, the street lamp in the yard slightly illuminated the room and the hallway. I woke up in the middle of the night from strange sounds in the kitchen. It felt like someone was crawling around in the lower shelves and making noise with pots and pans without any shame. The layout of the apartment was such that when I left the room, I passed the bathroom, toilet, the doors of which were on the right along the hallway, and ended up in the kitchen. My parents' bedroom was at the end of the second hallway, the passage on the left. So, I thought that my mother was trying to find something in the middle of the night and got out of bed. I went through the door and discovered that the open bathroom door was blocking my view of the kitchen. And it was still too dark. Usually, if the light in the kitchen is on, it illuminates the hallway even through the closed kitchen door, half of which is made of glass. I was determined to find out what my mother was doing there and moved forward, pushing the door to the bathroom. The door cleared my view and I froze in shock. Small creatures were crawling around the kitchen, their silhouettes visible in the kitchen thanks to the street lamp. I saw them unclearly, because the light from the lamp fell on the ceiling of the hallway and kitchen. But this was enough to make out at least 6 silhouettes about 40 centimeters high. As soon as the bathroom door closed, they moved, and made noise in the kitchen for about 2 seconds, but then froze as if they saw me. I stood there, fucking stunned by what I saw, for what felt like 5 seconds. And then the little ones rushed in my direction in a crowd and there were even more of them than I saw through the kitchen passage. I heard the stomping of feet on the linoleum and then on the parquet in the hallway. I rushed back into the room and slammed the door behind me. I jumped onto the bed in one bound and pressed myself against the wall. And then I heard pounding knocks on the door. It seemed to me that they ran up to the door, crashed into it and started pounding it with their fists and pushing it. The noise was simply deafening but did not last even half a minute. Everything went quiet. So I sat there until dawn and in the morning I got a beating from Dad, who was angry that the lower shelves in the kitchen were open and the dishes were just lying in a mountain instead of being neatly stacked. I never told my parents anything. I don't remember much from that age, but that night is etched in my memory forever in all its details. So nothing came to my mind except that it was a crowd of gnomes. What they were looking for is unknown. The dishes were not missing. Anyway, this story happened about 10 years ago, in the middle of summer. I was at a recreation center near the city. One day, 2 other guys I knew, brothers, and I decided to take a walk to the neighboring village to see what they were selling there in terms of booze. The center is in the forest, we left it and walked along an asphalt highway. The sun was scorching, it was hot. The road wound between the fields. There was not a soul on the road except us, no cars. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something to our left. A black spot separated from the forest belt and went diagonally across the field from us. I called out to the guys who were walking ahead and the 3 of us started watching it. What did it look like? Who the hell knows? It was about 200 meters away, it was about the height of a man and moved half hidden in the meadow grass. A man? Well, unless he put on a fur coat with his head and walked like a mortar. A bear? Never seen one. NKH crossed the field and disappeared into the forest plantation. We reached the village, found a store, and casually asked the saleswoman what kind of evil spirits were wandering around the fields. She laughed, but said nothing. We walked back and saw nothing more. Of course, my head could have been burning, but I was not alone. The image of this black spot moving across the field is etched in my memory. I can still see it. Oops, my dear Mukosransk. I know a couple of slightly creepy stories about Vitebsk, but nothing mystical. Story 1. In general, this town is not very big, and where the center is now, there used to be the outskirts, and now, the most epic place to hang out in the city, the so-called Victory Square, is adjacent to the old cemetery, under the multi-story building Memory of the People. In short, this is a house with a pompous inscription stands at the end of the square. When excavation work was carried out in the middle of this house, it was a no-brainer to find skulls. Story 2. Few people know, but where the children's clinic and hospital are located on Schrader Street, in the apple orchard, there was a German cemetery of valiant soldiers of the Reich who died in the outskirts of the city in 1941 to 1944. They dug it up during the reconstruction of the hospital complex in about 2013. I also remember walking around the excavation site in one place looking for some German junk, but fuck it. Story 3. True or not, fuck who knows. I think my friend had a sister, and she was walking through a new development area in the Klinov area. It's like a village in the middle of the city, and she came across a skull washed out by the rain in one of the pits. Without thinking twice, she took it with her, but then at home, under the influence of her relatives' beatings, she threw it down the garbage chute. And now the creepiness. Story 4. I have an absolutely, completely crazy imagination, and I can blame it all on it, but as a child, I saw all sorts of crap. Yes, maybe these are dreams, and most likely that's even true. Of what stuck in my memory most, there are 3 moments. 1. At night from the balcony I saw a wedge of multicolored lights flying over the house. 2. I couldn't fall asleep until a person's shadow passed through the room. I waited for it specifically. As soon as it passed by me I fell asleep. 3. In the fucking sleep I slept with my parents in the same room. Once I woke up and saw that one of the parents was sitting on the bed and looking into space. And this happened more than once, yet I asked Dad, what happened, and then my father wakes up and gets up, and the silhouette sitting on the bed instantly disappears. And to top it off, my grandmother was an atheist, but she saw her mother in the apartment who died 40 days ago, and since then she started going to church.